Welcome to Coding Up. This video I want to tell you what are the three most important concepts I think there are to master SQL, and this could cover mysql or postgres, but I think there's three things that you can master, which I don't think are impossible to master, but when you really get a hold of these three things, you'll definitely be on your way to really knowing what you're doing. The first thing I think you should know how to do is how to create tables, which includes inserting data, exporting data, and I think it would be helpful to use a tool such as mysql, which I have here, or AI as well can help you. So with SQL, I mean, your job is to take lots of data and transform it or do queries or display the data. And in order to get practicing or in order to get good with dealing with a substantial data set, to know how to create tables. And I think it's good to start with something like mysql, which is where you can just generate just random tables of things. So you can always use the AI tool will help you, right? So you can ask it to create columns, or like it suggests here, flight logs, right? You can ask it to do that. It'll start creating an example of a data set. You can go down here, give a name for your table, include the create table. Let's say we only want 20 rows, and we'll just do preview, right? And so this is an example of all these insert into statements that you can then copy and paste. Just simply copy and paste this into your editor. And I want to include ID primary key, right? Let's see if this will give us a primary key as well. Primary key is important because that's what you use to identify rows, right? So I think this is a good example here of a table that's generated for us, and so then we can easily just copy and paste this. I'm just going to do one thing at a time here. Just copy the create tables thing here, so you don't really have to sweat out creating your own create table statements, because sometimes it gets tricky how to do that. So from there, if you want to create the table, you just simply go to your SQL query editor. I use dbeaver. I recommend dbeaver or mysql workbench if you're using mysql, or pgadmin for postgres, but generally I recommend dbeaver because then you can also use a lot of different databases, right? So that's our create table statement. If we want to add a primary key, we could do this, right? Right, so we made this column a primary key. I could have also, before I ran the create table statement, could have also just done this, right? I think there's a word called auto increment. You can do that too, but I wanted to show the alter table syntax. So then I could refresh our tables here. We'll see that our table is here, right here, right? That's our table. So then let's import the data. Again, just copy and paste this. Right, and I hope this is going to work. I'm going to just try to run all this. Example of a so they gave us a different idea for this. Looks exactly like what we did here. Just copy that and try that. Okay, that worked. So I asked the AI to help us out with these insert statements. Apparently it does not like these slashes. It would rather see dashes here instead. So again, this comes down to just getting good with importing data, and later we'll show exporting data. I'll preview that again. Okay, so this I think should work better. Control C, copy and paste that stuff in there. Right, we have overlapping primary keys. So we're going to exclude some of these. Okay, so now we have data, more data, much more data. Refresh and show all this stuff. Okay, so we finally have an example of how we can mock data and import it. And that came down to appreciating the fact that we have to have, a date format that matches MySQL. So just be mindful of that, and you have all kinds of choices here. So one of those will work. Now, when you want to come up with a schema, now this is a little hard to teach, but if you right click here, a good thing to do is generate DDL, right? So part of knowing how to import and export data is understanding that you can right click these tables, right, and generate SQL. You don't have to really create this on your own. And this is an example of an insert statement generated by SQL. You can right click here and you could generate like DDL, right? And this is the create table statement derived from the create table we just had. So this is good to know. A lot of times you don't really have to make your own insert statements. You can just use the SQL here, and I'm going to show another tool to you, which is dumping. So a lot of times you have to dump your data. It's important when you're dealing with migrating data. So a lot of times you'll have to move all your information from an SQL table over to another instance of it. So you would do something like this. Right, you would use the command line here to help you out. Let's just call this video data dump. And the table we're going to dump is flight logs. Okay. Right. So this is an example of, this looks very messy, but this is the data from that flight logs table dumped, and this is what it would look like. And that, again, that's done by doing a command line command where we tell MySQL to dump all this information for us. Same thing can be done with Postgres. Yeah, so again, I recommend using AI tools or something like Mockaroo, and don't forget that you can, with your SQL editor, right click here and you can generate DDL. Postgres is more, their DDL tool is more powerful. It can generate a full schema for you. And on the topic of schema, you can always click here to see, right, schema. Now the important thing, and this will lead into the second point about joins. So I think joins is the second most important concept you should get comfortable with knowing SQL. So we have our ERD diagram here, but SQL is often called like a relational database, right? A relational database system, something like that, is like a thing where you'll have like an instance of Postgres or something on a cloud or in your local environment, and it's looking for relations, right? It's looking for multiple tables and relationships between those entities, and relationships are made on primary keys and foreign keys. And right now this table stands alone. It doesn't really have any relationships, right? There's no other tables. So naturally you would think you would have to create another table and then have foreign keys and primary keys referencing each other. I've already built out an example of it with this table here. Alright, this is a table called Airbnb. It's got this primary key ID here, right? It's got all kinds of information you would generally associate with a booking type website. And if we click the ER diagram, we'll see that this Airbnb table has a relationship to another table called Airbnb transactions. And I created a entity relationship. There is a reference from this table, Airbnb transactions place ID, to Airbnb ID. And if we go expand our Airbnb transaction table and look at its foreign keys, right? Yeah, you can see that it references the Airbnb table, right, on this column ID. And I had a create table statement for this Airbnb transactions table I made. So I was thinking, like, imagine if we had a table keeping track of transactions, right? Things, bookings that were made in Airbnb. We might want to keep track of an ID for the transaction, so each transaction would have a unique ID. A place ID, right? It would be associated with a Airbnb location, and it could have integer days, right? How many days was the booking for, right? Now you might think, like, why don't we add a column to this Airbnb transactions table called the final price, right? So final price you would think would be days times the price here, right? Our Airbnb table has a price. You would think this is like, you know, $578 per day, $497 per day. So why don't we just calculate the price and just dump that into this Airbnb transactions table? Well, you could do that, why not? But you could also do a joins query, right? So what we could do is we could query these two tables, join them on ID, and calculate price by just doing days multiplied by price. So I'm going to show you an example of that. Select, let's say, a dot star, at dot star from Airbnb, join the other Airbnb, at on a dot id equals at dot, I think I called it place ID, right? Of course, doing all kinds of typos. Okay, so now we have some joins going on here, but this doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all, right? All we did was we joined the fact that we have Airbnb transactions joining with Airbnb, but we want to start doing some calculations, right? So we want to calculate the price, right? What would be the price here, right? What would be 497.86 times, let's say, 5 days, right? Or I should say times 2 days. Do something like, yeah, let's say az dot days times a dot price, right? I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Round, let's give us a round number. As cost, we'll call this column cost. Let's just only select a few columns here, right? A dot yeah, room type, yeah. Let's only select a few of these columns. And then az dot place ID, and then az dot days. Okay, so now we have a more robust looking query. Okay, so now we're seeing cost, and we did that by doing a joins. So we see here for place ID 1, let's order this by, show you order by, also order by place ID. Right, so for place ID 1, if you stay there for 2 days, it's going to cost over $1,100. 3 days, this looks like it makes sense. It's going to cost even more, $1,700. For place ID 5, where we have a couple instances of bookings, 2 days will cost you $644, 3 days will cost you $966. So yeah, this shows you why joins is, I think, the second most important thing to know, because this is where, instead of creating bloated tables where you have all kinds of information dumped into all your tables, you can be more lean and nimble with what you're doing, because then you can join tables on primary keys and foreign keys, and then do, magic like this where we can calculate prices. So we can be very dynamic and fluid with what we're doing. There's another thing called, I'll type it out here, called right join, right? And left join. So here you can see that all these cells, as the Excel wizards would tell you, all these cells are occupied, right? It all looks nice, but sometimes you're going to want to do like a left join where you're going to include nullish. You're going to include instances when data is not matching. So just to show you visually like what happens. All right, so if I wrote left join here, let's see what would happen. We would just get a lot of empty results from this left join. Right, so we're gonna have all these nullish results. So these are all places in the Airbnb table where there's really not any information lining up on the place ID or ID from the Airbnb transactions table, right? So this gives you a null result. So that's left join, right? And if you take away left join, you're just going to only include matching. And then the third most important concept is aggregates and window functions. And I think these need to be learned together. You may struggle to learn aggregates, which is similar to group by. You may struggle with aggregates or you may struggle with window functions. But I do think it's good to learn both of them together because they're both basically the same idea, and you're going to be able to tackle and solve a lot of different SQL problems more quickly if you pick up both of these at the same time. So aggregates are where we can do like average, right? We can find average, or we could find max value, min value, count, frequency, number of things happening. There's other ones such as, I'm drawing a blank. Yeah, row number. This is a window function, right? So we could generate numbers for each of these. Each instance we could generate like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can generate rank. We can rank things as being first, second, third, fourth, or like between. Not really an aggregate, but that's a good keyword to know. So right, if you're dealing with ranges of things, if you want to pick out things that are between this value or that value. So these are like your window functions or your aggregates, your calculations, and then your like keywords, which will help you get to that place, would be things like group by. Okay, so group by is closely associated with the aggregates like min, max, average, count. Group by is an important keyword. Having is an important keyword. Having is similar to where, right? Having is like part of a conditional logic. And then another keyword is partition. and that's associated with window function. When you see the word partition, just immediately think window function, because that's a window function when you're dealing with partitions. And maybe that's it. Another keyword is over. Another window function keyword. So group by is critical for the normal aggregates, and then over is like it's a similar keyword, but this is like triggers the window function. So yeah. So what if we wanted to do like an aggregate function on this query we just did, right? Let's say we wanted to find the average cost. So you can see here we have like 9 results here. And that coincides with the fact that we entered, I think, nine rows of data. But we want to, let's say we want to find like the average cost of somebody using, average cost of a booking, right, at Airbnb. So what if we added average, just the word average. I'm not sure if you can put a round inside of these. I'm not sure if this will work. Right. Maybe this will not work. Let's run this. There you go, it did work. Right, so there you go. That tells us our average cost. $1,158. It did not round it for us. So this would be like if you just want to get an average over this whole set here, right? Over this word, over with the empty like arguments here. This is just like, it's like just over everything, right? Just default behavior. I think there would be another way to write this. Yeah, I mean, we could just group by. I could show you a group by example, right? All right, so what if we wanted to do average cost for each of these particular places? Okay. So for place ID 1, it's showing us that our average cost is $1,400. Place ID 5, our average cost is $805. And there's other window functions and aggregates such as count. So we just simply find the frequency per place ID. Right, so place ID 1, there's 2. Right? So this is important to know. Okay, in order to use our aggregate function where we're trying to get the average cost over place IDs, we have to throw in there also the accommodates and room type. It wants to see the full grouping here, place ID, accommodates, room type. So this is another way of using your group by and the subquery here. It's a little tricky. A lot of times it's going to throw you an error. What I recommend is going along with what the error recommends you to do, which is to throw in all these extra columns. Sometimes the information that comes back won't make much sense, but it could just come down to refactoring or just using a window function instead. Going back to our window function, there's another characteristic of window function I want to show you, where it's not just that you can partition by a certain column that you want to partition by, but you can also be more particular and reducing with your window function. So before we found average over place ID, right? Like this, right? Average price calculated, right? Over property type, and review score rating. These are like almost two random columns from this Airbnb table. But you can actually partition over these types of things. You can be creative with it. You can create all kinds of partitions as long as those columns exist, right? As long as those are real columns. You can divide them up and do some sort of aggregate over that area. I could pull out the rating here too. So we're going to see groupings of review score rating and property type. And I spelled something wrong. Scores rating. Right. So when we have condos with review scores of 43, right, we're going to see this average price, 805. Condos with review scores of 51, we're going to see this average price. So yeah, I hope you picked up some tips about how to do some aggregate functions and how to import, export data, and how to get more comfortable with joins. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and happy coding.